Welcome to an intro on public forum debate. I'm David Griffiths. I have done public forum for 3 years and hopefully know enough to benefit you and all of your PF endeavors. So let's jump right in with an overview of public forum debate. Public forum is similar to policy debate in that public forum debate is conducted by teams of 2 people with alternating speeches for their side, either affirming or negating their topic. Contrasting PF to LD, there is little focus on extreme speed or arcane debate jargon or argumentation theory, as the goal of PF is to present arguments to a normal person pulled straight off the street. This is done by making persuasive and logical arguments in a manner that is accessible to a wide variety of audiences. A lot of public forum debate is with evidence acquired through extensive research. Arguments must be supported by evidence rather than just rhetoric. The key thing to remember is that PF cases are tailored to judges that have never seen a PF debate before. Moving on to differences between PF and other events in the debate world, there is no philosophy being used, which is different from LD. There is also no personal stories, which you may use in other speech events. Public forum is just straight facts, and showing how your side should be the side that your judge votes for. Another difference is seen in the fact that it is 2-on-2 debate. You will be debating with a partner, which is comparatively unique to most events you might participate in. Finally, there is no triangle used to show when a new point is being addressed. You oftentimes develop a rhythm within the debate where any excessive movement becomes a distraction to yourself and others in the room that you are debating in. There are also similarities with other events, as there is impromptu speaking or speaking not based on a written out speech. This is seen after the first speeches for both teams and is a continual theme throughout the debate. However, you do have access to evidence, so speaking without a written out speech isn't as bad as it may seem. PF also has resolutions, which may be a familiar term if you are involved with congressional debate. You are either supporting an idea or trying to show why it should not be supported. And with all events, prepping is an essential part of PF in the form of gathering evidence and writing out speeches. The more you prep, the more success you will start seeing. So let's look at some example resolutions, so you can get a feel of what you might see in PF throughout the year. On this list, there are a couple good examples, such as resolved on balance economic sanctions are reducing the threat Russia poses to Western interests, and resolved United Nations peacekeepers should have the power to engage in offensive operations. The most recent topic in regards to the creation of this video was resolved. The United States should no longer pressure Israel to work towards a 2-state solution. I didn't really like this topic as a result of the wording. Specifically, the term no longer pressure became a constant issue in our debates and misled from the meat of the topic. This is why understanding and defining parts of the resolution is essential in PF. If you understand your resolution and all that it contains, then you will have more success in your debate rounds. You may have to watch for topics that are closer to what you would see in LD, where certain words in the resolution hint to arguments dealing with morality. You also may see topics that heavily favor one side over the other. I have also seen topics that are relevant and irrelevant to the current global situation. Hopefully, though, you can experience a couple good PF topics throughout your debating career. Moving on to what your cases will probably look like and comparing them to what they should look like. This is an example of one of my first cases that I wrote, with the resolution being resolved. On balance, economic globalization benefits worldwide poverty reduction. It is the most likely similar to something you might have at some of your first tournaments. It contains definitions and a speech that the first speaker on your team would use. You would also rely on the same speech and the information it contains throughout all of your other speeches in the debate. This earlier and not as advanced case also contains extra arguments that we could use if needed and our sources. While this case got the job done, meaning it gave us something to say in the debate round, it was fairly basic and lacked the full amount of information necessary to be successful in public forum debate. Again, this worked, but it is not as good as this case, which is a later case that I used with the topic being resolved. United Nations peacekeepers should have the power to engage in offensive operations. This is a better example of a PF case. Again, we have our definitions laid out, but this time we have our 3 contentions stated at the very top. This is helpful as everything that occurs in the debate should reflect back to your contentions or your main arguments that you are making. Our evidence, instead of just being in a speech, is organized in a way where very specific arguments are put together and are easily accessible during the round. This also provides for an opportunity to have more evidence that you might have contained in just your speech alone. The more evidence that you can present to your judge supporting your case, the better chance you have of winning the round. You can notice that at the bottom of each piece of evidence there is a source. In this case, we have the foundation briefs that we use listed. I would recommend that besides the page in the briefs or the URL, that you also have the source name, author, and date easily accessible to prevent any conflicts dealing with sources from arising. You can see the amount of evidence that we have had on our cases, and again how they are not only organized by contentions, but also by specific arguments. This is mostly evidence or cards, as we have articles quoted supporting our case and specifically the contentions upholding our case. This continues and shows you how much evidence you really need. Moving on to blocks. The example in this video is actually from a different case than the one I've been using as an example. This example not only shows what a block is, but also its use within the debate. You can see a block being specific evidence or a card used against specific arguments that your opponent may or may not use. These counters are from my AF case, with the resolution resolved. The United States should no longer pressure Israel to work towards a two-state solution. You can see how each block addresses an argument that an opponent may bring up. This is helpful as you can argue against your opponents with evidence you have in an easily accessible format. In regards to counters against your opponents, make sure you are not only using any briefs you might have, but also cards you filed away onto Evernote. If you have a laptop in the round, using the Control-F shortcut is very helpful when searching for evidence dealing with a topic you identify as obscure. This is just a continuation of my examples of blocks. Going back to the case dealing with UN peacekeepers, you can see the next part of the case, which is the actual speech. This would be used by the first speaker. A lot of times, this is where I include my framework if I'm using one. A framework is a concept that your entire case is wrapped around. It's almost a lens for your judge to use to view your case. A common example is cost-benefit analysis, where you limit the debate to looking at the cost versus the benefits in regard to the resolution. Something else you can include in the beginning of your speech is an observation, which points out specific parts of the resolution and establishes the burden of proof. This shows the judge what your opponents have to achieve in order to win the debate. The written out speech in general should be well practiced by a PF team's first speaker, to the point where it is almost memorized. The key is keeping your speech only a little over 4 minutes, as you want to make sure you use all the time allotted to you, but at the same time not go over by too much. Usually you get a 10-second grace period, and you want your speech as close to 4 minutes as possible. This means you should be timing your speech before your rounds to maximize the amount of information you can share in the round. Another factor to consider is the use of subpoints. While I wouldn't urge you to have 3 subpoints on each contention, throwing in a couple subpoints throughout your case affects your opponent's flow and helps give you an edge within the debate. This is just the closing of the speech. Again, you can see that this speech is in a font that is big enough for you to read. Also note how the speech is ended. Having a short ending like, "We still stand in firm negation of the resolution and urge you to do the same. Thank you," wraps up your speech and takes up very little time. You can most likely say this after your 4 minutes during the grace period. Though this is a pretty good example of a case, a better case can be viewed if you are on the Northridge Debate team by looking on Evernote and following the instructions written on this slide. This slide also shows you how to use Evernote. All that I will explain in regards to Evernote is that it is an effective way to store all of the evidence you use, as well as providing a way to show your opponents and judges that your evidence is legitimate, and not falsified. You will most likely be able to show your card, and Evernote is a great way to do so, satisfying everyone in the round. Looking at the format of the actual debate, you can see that each speaker on each team gets to speak twice, once for 4 minutes and once for 2 minutes. You can also see that each speaker gets to participate in 2 crossfires, one with only one opponent, and the other with all 4 people in the debate. The first 2 speeches given in the round are called the constructive speeches, as speakers construct or establish their cases. These speeches are the written out speeches and should be nearly perfect in presentation. They, along with your rebuttal speeches, are 4 minutes apiece. The constructive speech shows your opponents and your judge your position on a resolution, as well as your contentions and any subpoints that you might have. Following the two constructive speeches is a crossfire between the two first speakers on the two different teams. This is where questions of clarification as well as clash may take place. It is important to remember that first, most judges don't flow a crossfire, and second, clarifying your opponent's case is very important. While it may feel like you have to attack your opponent's case in a crossfire, it is more important to understand your opponent's case so you can attack it in your speeches. After the first crossfire is the rebuttals for both teams. In the rebuttals, the second speaker most importantly attacks the other team's case, contentions, and subpoints. It is beneficial to start with explaining why your framework should be the dominant framework in the round. After that, it's good to attack your opponent's points and subpoints using the blocks you have prepared, as well as cross-applying your opponent's arguments to your own contentions. You finally want to end your rebuttal by going back over your points if you have time. I usually spend about 2.5 to 3 minutes attacking my opponent's case, using the remainder of the time to reassert my own points. When extending your own case, make sure you are using more evidence than just what you presented in your constructive speech. Having a plethora of evidence at your disposal in the round could, and most likely will, be the difference that decides a victor. After the two rebuttal speeches, there is another crossfire with the two second speakers. Clarification should not be happening in this crossfire, and more clash should be occurring. This is when you can address not only your opponent's case, but also any attacks they engaged in against your case. After the second crossfire, there are two summaries, each 2 minutes long. The summaries are used to narrow down the debate and summarize the main arguments that are made in the round. The summary doesn't deal so much with contentions, but rather the contested areas of the debate. The topics that were brought up continuously in previous speeches and crossfires should be the topics addressed in your summary speeches. After the two summaries, there is a grand crossfire with all four debaters asking and answering questions. While this crossfire shares a 3-minute time limit that the other crosses have, it is very different because instead of two voices talking over each other, there are four. It is very important in Grand Cross to first, let everyone speak, including your partner. It is very rude if you don't. Second, you need to be polite with your interruptions. Overall, Grand Cross is fun, and the contested arguments in the round can be addressed by all those in the debate. The debate ends with both teams presenting a final focus in which the voters, or the reasons why your team thinks they have won the debate, are presented to the judge. This speech is an opportunity to connect with the judge and show him or her why your team was the superior team within the debate. The final focus, in my opinion, is the most important speech in the round and helps your judge decide who to vote for in the round. I like to use voters such as framework, topicality, or the flow, but you can use more specific voters dealing with specific arguments made in the round. The final component of the debate is 2 minutes of prep time that both teams have the opportunity to use any time throughout the debate in between speeches. I prefer to use almost my entire 2 minutes right before my final focus, as I see that as being the most important speech in the debate. Make sure you are only using prep time after your opponent's speeches. Don't give them extra time to prepare their own speeches. Wait until the prep time benefits your team the most. So let's move on to the actual debate in further detail. The round begins with a coin flip, where you can determine whether to either speak first or second, or to debate pro or con. I would recommend you going second speaker for the most part. It is a better strategy and allows you to have the last words in the debate. This is important as your speech will be the last words the judge hears before making his or her decision. However, I would not do this if your one side of the debate is either one-sided or you have a significantly better case. In my debate career, my partner and I would choose either app or neg more than we would choose second speaker. Overall, deciding what to choose should be on a varying basis. The best situation would include you having very strong app and neg cases, allowing you to choose second speaker. However, you will find a lot of times that one side is clearly better and will bring you more success in the debates you participate in. Moving on to the first speech. Again, this is where you are able to construct your case by not only stating your points, but explaining them and supporting them with evidence. Again, this should be written out and practiced. It is very important to be getting your speech to 4 minutes. A lot of judges see ending early as a sign of being unprepared. The second constructive speech is exactly like the first one. The only difference is that you will need to have questions for cross, as you will move right in from your constructive speech to crossfire. Keep in mind, for all constructive speeches, both the second and the first, you want to get through all of your contentions in the speech. If you don't, you give your partner less time to fully attack your opponent's case. In the first crossfire, you need to first and foremost make sure you are only looking at the judge, not your opponent. Even when you are addressing your opponent, make sure you do not look at them. In the first cross, your purpose is to not only clarify points of confusion made in the constructive cases, but also attack your opponent's case with rigorous questioning. The first crossfire is the only time in the debate that you should be asking for clarification on your opponent's case and contentions. With all questioning, keep in mind that there is no time limit on how long you can ask a question. However, you want to not ask really long questions, as your opponent and judge might view that as making a statement instead of a question. Keep in mind that in all crossfires, you can interrupt your opponent. However, you must do this in a polite way, to the point that your opponent has to let you speak. The trick is try to keep what your opponent is saying to a minimum, by using tactics such as saying they answered your question when they were just rambling anyway. The most important thing to know about the first cross is to be polite. Most judges will weigh how you treat your opponents in cross when weighing the round. Most of this information applies to the second crossfire. However, I would not be asking for clarification in the second crossfire and only ask questions on the largely contested topics of the round. The next set of speeches are the rebuttals. These are not pre-written before the round, as the objective in the rebuttal is to attack your opponent's case. I would, to begin, reaffirm your framework and attack the framework of your opponents. I would spend no more than 15 seconds doing so, because it is most important to hit all of your opponent's contentions and subpoints. I would spend the majority of the time, most likely 3 minutes, on attacking your opponent's case. I would use evidence and blocks that you prepared, as well as cross-applying your opponent's arguments to your own. In the last minute, I would go back over your own contentions and subpoints, presenting new evidence that wasn't brought up in the constructive speech. Before you begin speaking, I would use what is called an off-time roadmap, which is a short introduction that is not timed, that gives the order of what you will cover in your speech to the judge. It might go like this. I would like to start out with a brief off-time roadmap. I will be addressing framework, then attack my opponent's case, and if time permits, go back over my own. That couple sentences would not be included in your 4 minutes and helps the judge know what you are going to address. So let's look at an example of how to prepare for the rebuttal speech while you are in the round. This is a format that I used as a second speaker to write my rebuttals so I could present it in an organized manner. I used a lined piece of paper and basically used the format on this slide to develop my rebuttal. I first noted any framework, observations, and important definitions that my opponents presented. I would then write my opponent's contentions and subpoints. Under each subpoint, I left enough room so I could write arguments against my opponent's subpoints. An example of what I might put is shown. I might state, my opponent's first contention is blah blah blah. You can cross-apply my opponent's subpoint to my contention 1 subpoint B, where I show with my Brookings Institute card that blah blah blah. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how to go through each argument. It is important to note that evidence is essential to use as well as arguments. Make sure you are using different evidence than the evidence presented in your constructive speech, as it shows the judge that you are prepared and have lots of evidence supporting your case. So enough of that, let's move on to summaries. In the 2 summary speeches, your job is to go over the main points of contention, addressing arguments made in cross as well as in the rebuttal. This is an opportunity to not only fend off the attacks that your opponents made against your case, but also to further extend your main arguments against your opponent's case. I would also use an off-time roadmap in this speech. Finally, remember you only have 2 minutes, unlike the 4 minutes that you had in both the constructive and rebuttal speeches. Let's move on to my favorite part of the debate, grand crossfire. Grand crossfire can oftentimes be intimidating, confusing, and very fun. I would describe it as madness, as all 4 debaters talk over each other to put their 2 cents in on each topic discussed. It is very important in Grand Cross to be polite and make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak, including your partner. You can interrupt politely, however, when your opponents are taking longer than they should with both questions and responses. Use this final crossfire to attack your opponent's case with questions that show discrepancies and problems with their case. If crossfire doesn't go the way you want it to, remember that most judges don't weigh it very heavily, if they even weigh it at all. They will take note, however, on how polite you were to your opponent, which means be polite. The last part of the debate is the final focus, which is, in my opinion, the most important speech in the entire debate. This is where you give the voters, or why you think the judge should give your team the win. I would go over voters such as framework, the flow, and topicality, allowing your judge to know why they should let your team win the debate. Because of its importance to the round, I would make sure the majority of the speech is written out, word for word, in an eloquent speech that your judge will remember when he or she decides the victor. Also note that no new arguments can be brought up in final focus. You can bring up new evidence supporting old arguments, though a lot of judges dislike you doing so. Prep time is the safety blanket you are given in the round, as you can use as much as you want to, whenever you want, in between speeches. You do only get 2 minutes total. I would use as much of it as you can right before the final focus, as it allows you to write an amazing speech to wow your judge. So that is all of the components of the debate that involve time. I want to really quickly talk about flowing. Flowing is the way that arguments are tracked by your judge, opponents, and hopefully you. This is an example of how you would format a flow. It is important to depict arguments that have been hit by using some type of symbol such as an X. To show arguments that have been made and extended throughout the round, I would use arrows. In the end, this should help you see which arguments still stand, meaning which ones were not addressed and were extended throughout the round. It should also show arguments that were dropped, meaning your opponent stopped bringing up those specific points. Almost all judges flow, so it is very important that you do too as well. So although this is a debate event where arguments are the most important part, the way you present those arguments also matter. You can talk faster while presenting information, but you need to make sure you are still understandable. It is also good to look at your judge and emphasize important points by fluctuating your voice. Finally, make sure you are rehearsing your constructive speeches and practicing other parts of the debate before you go to a tournament. The biggest difference in winning is being able to read your judge. You need to determine the judge's debating experience and present your case in a manner that would allow the judge to understand it. It's good to ask for your judge's paradigm, or what they want to see in the debate. That helps you format the arguments that you make in the round. Make sure you are always speaking clearly and watching for mommy judges who have no idea what they are doing. Here are some terms that you might encounter at tournaments or with other debaters. Spewing and spreading refer to speaking so fast that it is hard to understand what they are saying. You should not do this in PF, though you might encounter it, so be prepared. We have already discussed framework and how it is a way to frame your case. An observation shows the judge what you have to do as well as your opponents to win the round. Contentions are the large arguments you make in the round. A card refers to information about the evidence you use. You may hear it as a point of information, though this is not as common. A lay judge is one that is new and doesn't really know what he or she is doing. A block is a group of evidence that you have to argue against specific arguments. Hopefully you understand these terms well enough that if someone used one of these terms in a round, you would understand it. So these are just a few tips. 1, make sure you are using credible sources for your evidence. 2, practice before tournaments with another team from your school or even just with your partner. 3, have some way that your evidence is presented in a way that it will not be questioned. You may do this by storing evidence on Evernote. 4, don't give up. Even if you don't succeed, try again. Finally, make sure you are having fun. Overall, if you want to be successful in public forum debate, you need to be prepared by spending time constructing a case and gathering evidence. The more you prep, the more you win. So that is a quick overview of public forum debate. I hope you enjoyed PF as much as I did. Thanks for watching, and happy debating.